Imagine standing in a courtroom, your future in the hands of a judge, when suddenly a remark is made, one that cuts deep, exposing your race and identity in front of everyone. This is exactly what happened to a black woman, a respected diplomat, who found herself publicly insulted by a judge during a high-stakes trial. But what seemed like a personal attack would soon take an unexpected turn, one that would shift the course of the trial entirely. As the tension built and the words from the judge echoed in the room, no one could have predicted how her background as a diplomat would come into play, changing the entire verdict. Was it her professionalism or something deeper that caused the jury to rethink their stance? Stay tuned to find out how this shocking moment in the courtroom led to a twist no one saw coming. The woman at the center of this case, Tamara Scott, was no ordinary individual. She had spent years navigating complex international negotiations, using diplomacy to bridge divides between nations. Yet, here she was, caught in a situation where none of her experience or stature seemed to matter. The judge's words were harsh and discriminatory, a pointed remark aimed at undermining her credibility. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats, watching the tension rise. Tamara, always composed, stood tall, her mind racing as the weight of the moment hit her. She knew this was no longer just about the case at hand. It had become personal. What they didn't know, however, was that her ties to the diplomatic world ran deeper than they realized. Would this knowledge shift the dynamic in the room? Was there more to Tamara than just her professional title, something that could turn the tide in her favor? As the trial progressed, the jury couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in the courtroom dynamics. Whispers spread like wildfire, some questioning if the judge's words had crossed a line, while others wondered if it was just a matter of misjudgment. Tamara's calm exterior hid a storm brewing beneath the surface. She had spent years perfecting the art of diplomacy, always managing to remain neutral in the face of tension. But here, in this very courtroom, the rules of decorum seemed to have failed her. The judge, Robert Cartwright, was a man known for his stern and often abrasive approach. To many, his insults seemed nothing more than another part of his unrelenting persona. But to Tamara, it felt like an attack on everything she stood for, not just her as a professional, but as a black woman in a position where her identity was often weaponized. Was this an isolated incident, or was it part of a larger pattern of discrimination within the justice system? Meanwhile, on the jury side, a few members began to question what was really at play. Sarah, a quiet yet observant woman, had been following the case from a distance, her thoughts clouded with doubt. She had seen Tamara's reaction to the insult, her restraint, her composure, and it struck a chord with her. Could someone so poised really be the villain the prosecution painted her to be? The more Sarah thought about it, the less sense the entire case made. Was Tamara being judged by her race more than the facts? Each person in that courtroom had a stake in the outcome, but none of them could have predicted how a simple shift in perspective could turn everything upside down. With Tamara's diplomatic background now coming into sharper focus, the stakes had never been higher. Would her past give her the upper hand, or would it be used against her? As the days wore on, the courtroom grew increasingly charged with tension. The prosecution pushed forward with its case, but Tamara's defense team was relentless. They subtly shifted the narrative, showing how the judge's remarks were not only inappropriate, but could have skewed the jury's perception of Tamara's character. Her legal team focused on her international work, her ability to bring hostile parties to the table, her role in brokering peace agreements, and her respected reputation on the global stage. They painted a portrait of a woman who had earned her place in the diplomatic world, someone who didn't deserve to be belittled for something as superficial as her race. But the deeper conflict was still brewing beneath the surface. Tamara couldn't escape the feeling that the trial was never about the facts of the case. Every step seemed to be a reflection of a larger, more insidious issue, the intersection of race, power, and gender. She knew that no matter how much she proved her worth, there would always be someone waiting to remind her of her place. As the jury deliberated, whispers continued. Sarah's mind raced. Could she be the one to sway the final decision? She thought about the judge's insult and how it made her feel. It wasn't just about Tamara anymore. It was about a larger system, a system that often failed to acknowledge the full humanity of Black women, especially those in positions of power. Was she ready to challenge that system, to stand up against the biases that ran so deep? It wasn't an easy decision, and the pressure was starting to weigh heavily on her. The hours ticked by, and the courtroom fell silent, awaiting the verdict. But it wasn't just a decision about Tamara. It had become a moment where every person in that room would have to confront their own role in perpetuating the status quo. The tension was unbearable. Would Tamara's identity as a diplomat be enough to change the narrative, or would the prejudice that had already been seeded prove to be too powerful to overcome? Just as the jury's deliberations reached a fever pitch, a new and unexpected development sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The defense had just finished presenting their closing remarks, and everyone was bracing for the verdict, when suddenly an unexpected figure entered the room, Tamara's former colleague, a diplomat named Marcus Lewis, who had worked closely with her on several high-profile international peace agreements. He wasn't scheduled to testify, but his presence alone had the power to shift everything. With a confident step, Marcus approached the stand, asking to speak with the judge. His interruption wasn't just a surprise, it was a revelation. He began to outline a secret meeting he and Tamara had attended years ago, one that had exposed the very same prejudices within the international community that were now manifesting in this trial. The details he shared were explosive, hinting at a larger conspiracy to undermine Black diplomats and their roles in global negotiations. But there was a catch. Marcus claimed that Tamara, in her commitment to diplomacy, had been forced to keep quiet about the network of powerful individuals who were actively working to limit the influence of people like her. As Marcus spoke, Tamara's eyes widened, a mix of shock and recognition flashing across her face. This wasn't just a trial about her. It was part of a larger, more dangerous game. The implications of what Marcus had just revealed sent ripples of disbelief through the courtroom. Was this just a desperate attempt to clear her name, or had Tamara truly been caught in the crossfire of a political war much bigger than anyone realized? The jury sat frozen, unsure of how to process this new, shocking information. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, felt her heart race. The story that had once seemed simple, an insult in the courtroom, had now morphed into something far more sinister. The stakes were higher than ever, and suddenly it wasn't just about a verdict. It was about exposing a network of power that had been operating behind the scenes for years. Would this new twist be enough to change the direction of the trial, or would it only add to the chaos? The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Marcus finished speaking. The weight of his words lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had frozen. Tamara's face was a mix of disbelief and fury. She had known for years that powerful people had been pulling the strings behind her back, but hearing Marcus reveal it all so publicly was a gut-wrenching moment. She had spent her entire career working for peace, keeping quiet, choosing the diplomatic route, but now, the consequences of that silence were catching up to her. The judge, Cartwright, looked uncomfortably at the defense team, trying to regain control of the room. The jury was in turmoil. Some were shocked, others confused. But Sarah, who had been quiet through much of the trial, stood up. Her voice, when it finally came, was firm and clear. "I believe it's time to reconsider what we're really judging here," Sarah said, addressing both the jury and the room at large. "This trial is about more than just Tamara. It's about the system that's been built to discredit and silence people like her." Her words hung in the air, and the tension crackled. The jury began to murmur among themselves, the gravity of Sarah's statement sinking in. It wasn't just a question of whether Tamara was guilty or innocent anymore. It was a question of fairness, of justice, of who really had the power in this room. The scales had tipped, and suddenly, the balance was uncertain. But just when it seemed like everything was shifting in Tamara's favor, an unexpected figure emerged. Another lawyer, one who had remained in the background up until now. This was the prosecution's shadow counsel, someone who had been quietly orchestrating behind the scenes. The lawyer stood up, a small smirk on their face, and revealed a crucial piece of evidence that no one had anticipated. It was a tape recorded years ago during a meeting where Tamara herself had made a damning comment about one of the international parties involved in the case. The statement was clear. Tamara had been more deeply embroiled in the politics of the situation than anyone had realized. The room went cold as the defense scrambled to understand how this tape had surfaced now, at the most critical moment. Was this the final blow to Tamara's defense? Had she truly been caught in the web she'd worked so hard to avoid? The shock rippled through the jury. Some members seemed ready to change their stance, others still unsure. As Tamara stood there, her eyes locked onto the prosecutor, the weight of it all finally hit her. This trial, this attack on her character, wasn't just about her actions or words, it was about who controlled the narrative. In that moment, she realized that the battle wasn't over. Even as she won the trial, she still had to face the bigger fight, the one that no court could decide. And as the judge began to prepare for the closing statements, the final twist emerged, leaving Tamara and everyone else in the courtroom wondering if the truth would ever truly come to light. In the end, the jury found Tamara not guilty, but the victory felt bittersweet. The tape, that was shocking, wasn't enough to override the mounting evidence of systemic bias that had permeated the trial. Sarah, whose courage had shifted the jury's perspective, stood quietly, watching as Tamara walked out of the courtroom. Tamara's victory wasn't just a legal win, it was a powerful statement against the deep-rooted prejudices that still plagued the system. Marcus's revelations had opened the door to a much larger conversation, one that Tamara knew would continue long after the trial was over. The shadowy forces behind the scenes had been exposed, but the battle was far from won. As she walked away from the courthouse, Tamara realized that the true fight for justice had only just begun. The world would see her for who she truly was, not just as a diplomat, but as a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity.